Hello, good evening, and welcome to the TNT show. I'm John Drummond, and I'm your host for the next 60, and I guarantee you exciting minutes. You'll be so glad you joined us tonight. Honestly, seriously. You know, it's been another great day for British democracy. I say this so often, but it's absolutely true. Each and every day brings a new scandal. Just when you think that corruption has reached its nadir, if that's what corruption reaches, we plumb further depths. And in unconnected news tonight, we learn that it's been a huge relief to the Dyson company that the Prime Minister's brother was available to join its board. And I'm sure we wish them all well in that appointment. Thanks for joining us this evening. Tonight, Richard Haviland is joining us. Now, Richard has been on a journey since he voted no in the 2014 election. And we'll be talking about Richard's journey, what it means to him, and what it might mean to many others. And we'll be talking about so much else besides. You really don't want to miss this. And we'll be taking your questions live. The TNT show, The Nation Talks. So you're the nation. Talk to us, ask us questions. We'll try and answer as many as we possibly can in the hour available. So in many respects, this is your show. If you want to know how to submit questions, you'll find that on the What's On guide strap, which is at the foot of the screen right now. Make use of it, please do. So now to our guest tonight. The Nation talks to Richard Haviland. Richard, how are you coping with the pandemic?
Hi, John, and thanks for having me. Very well, really. We're very lucky. I've said several times to people that if there had to be a pandemic in my lifetime, it's as good a time to have happened as it could have been, because I'm sort of too old to need to go out much, and I've got young kids who are not old enough to be that badly affected by it, and we live in rural Inverness, so we're in a pretty good place, and we have nothing much to complain about. So we feel.
How old are your children?
They are, good question, 7, 5, and 3. I'm a bit of a late starter. So yeah, the oldest is in school and has been doing a bit of home learning, but none of them are too badly affected, I don't think so. Yeah. So we feel very fortunate indeed.
It must have been quite stressful for you and your wife to be doing what you have to do and then also look after all the kids as well. And school them, I assume.
Yeah, it's been busy. And obviously the holiday lets have been closed at the kind of peak of the lockdown times. And again, we haven't been too badly affected by that because we would have been closed in the winter months anyway. So we've been fortunate in that respect. We've missed a bit of business, not too much. But yeah, it's been frantic, but in a kind of frantic domestic way, I'll look back and tell myself it was great fun, I'm sure.
So you're in the holiday lets business. How's it looking with prospective bookings and stuff?
Well, we're booked out now. I mean, we had customers last week for the first time. We're now booked out really for the rest of the summer, in one of them at least, which is it does particularly well. So people want breaks. Again, we're fortunate. We're in a good business. We're self-catering, so we don't even need to meet them in the building face to face. It's a beautiful spot, and we're lucky. We've got people want to get out here as quickly as they can.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine, particularly folks who are stuck in the middle of a town, let's say, and you can't go abroad, not unless you're very fortunate, you've got your own private jet, perhaps.
Exactly.
So for most of us, it means staycation.
Yeah.
It means looking for someplace close to home, perhaps, not terribly far away, but somewhere that provides a break.
Yeah. So
that we can relax and sort of, for the first time, get outdoors and not feel that we're breaking any lockdown restrictions or any of that stuff.
And it's a lovely feeling. I mean, this is new business to me. As you know, I've been a civil servant most of my career, but seeing the pleasure it gives, it really is. I mean, seeing people's faces light up when they arrive and see the view, which is tremendous. So it's nice to make people happy.
That's great. Now, tell us about Richard Haviland. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? I gather you went to school, the same school as Nigel Farage. Tell us all about that.
I wasn't the same year as him. I didn't know him, but poor Dulwich College has sort of suffered a bit from that connection. So I was adding that thousands of far more attractive people than Nigel Farage went to Dulwich College. I grew up in London, South London, in the 70s and 80s. What you might call a very, so classically Anglo-Scottish, very symmetrical family. So my My father was English from Surrey, but so they're still going strong, both my parents. From Surrey, but a Scots mother. So my mother grew up in Scotland, came to London when they got married, but had 2 English grandmothers. So both of them were kind of 50-50. And, so I grew up feeling just entirely British and Anglo-Scottish, but also very sort of aware of my separate identities within that. So, very, very sort of proudly, I don't know the word proud is overused, you know what I'm saying? Feeling very English on one side and very Scottish on another side, and very London too. We used to have long family holidays in Scotland and Christmas as well. And I've got a vast family in Perthshire, most of them musical, not me, but we had sort of big Cayleys at Hogmanay. So, I'd quite often be doing that, and then 3 days later I'd be on the terraces at Arsenal trying to sound as London as I possibly could to blend in there, so really sort of going back and forth, and feeling tremendously sort of attached to both England and Scotland, and to London too. So that was my upbringing. My 2 older brothers too, so we all went to the same school. We've talked about Dulwich College. Pretty comfortable, pretty privileged, very happy, loving parents. Sort of hard to know where to begin with them, really. But my father was a political journalist for much of the 70s and 80s. So for largely ITN, also the Times towards the end. My mother, before she married, worked in Austria, helping with refugees. Then gave up paid work to start a family. So I think what I'd say is they both instilled in all of us tremendously internationalist values, very outward-looking values. We spent a lot of our time traveling, and I continue to do that as an adult. A belief in the need to sort of look out and see the world, and to understand others, and sort of values of tolerance and compassion, I hope. So, strong values in that respect. And where did that take me? It took me from school to university in Edinburgh. I studied languages, and Spanish, Portuguese. Had some time living in Spain for a bit. And then from there into the civil service. I was a civil servant for the best part of 25 years, predominantly in the Department for International Development, which, as you probably know, has now been merged into the Foreign Office. So all the jobs I did in the government were international in outlook, if you like, so international departments. And yeah, I regarded myself more as a civil servant than as a development expert. But I felt tremendously proud all those years to work for DFID, given what it was doing. And, it really is a source of great pride still, I think, for all those things sort of whittled down, if you like, a merger of the Foreign Office. So it's still a matter of pride. I think that the slashing of the aid budget this year is a terrible tragedy, both for itself and for Britain's reputation. But I was very, very proud to work there, and sad to leave. Although when I left 2 years ago, but I felt the time come to get out. I was struggling, if I'm honest, to work for this government. And here I am. I've sort of washed up in. I should have said within all that. I moved to Scotland about 8 years ago, really not long before the 2014 referendum, to start a family, and we've ended up here. And I think we'll stop here now, because it's a pretty nice place to be, and we're enjoying the lets.
And your wife is Welsh, is that right? Or American?
She is. She's English-born, Welsh. She'll never forgive me that. She's Welsh-born to an English, also Anglo-Scottish family background, and then spent time in America too. And, I think she's listening in the other room now, so I'll probably get a slap across the wrist for my faux pas there. But so we're quite sort of, with the Scottish, the English, the Welsh, we're quite, and then a bit of American too. We sort of got a mix in us.
So here you are, you're living in Scotland. The 2014 referendum comes along, and your view was what? Well,
my view then, it really wasn't long before the 2014 referendum I moved up. So I was quick to register to vote, because I wanted to vote, and I wanted to vote no. And I didn't do much reading or much thinking about it, if I'm honest, because I suppose, given the background I've just described, there was no question to be asked for me. It was just a matter of instinct to vote, to keep the union together. I did read Gordon Brown's book at the time. I mean, and I admired it, and I thought it was full of interesting observations about the nature of the UK and Britain. But it didn't shape my vote. I mean, I was going to vote no anyway. Yeah, I didn't. As I said, I didn't give an awful lot of thought to it. I think it was just something that was very important to me to be able to do, and I felt lucky to be able to vote, having moved so relatively recently up to Scotland.
At that time, what was your view of the people who espoused constitutional change in the Yes campaign? Did you think they were a little bit sort of oddball? Or?
No, I've never. I mean, I've never seen. Yeah, oddball. Interesting question. I guess I guess the traditional view of many unionists, and I don't like all these words because these labels, define us in a way, but in other people's eyes in a way we don't necessarily want to be defined. But I think, I think that many people historically hadn't taken the independence movement particularly seriously as in terms of as being a real threat to the union. And actually, when I moved up, which wasn't that long before the referendum, it was only for the last few weeks, as you know, that the polls started to get close. But I've always respected people's points of view. I think one of the we'll come on to this later on maybe when we talk about language. But I mean, the word divisive is often used. I mean, divisive to me is not a matter of your politics. It's a matter of how you conduct your politics. So people are entitled to their view. I fully understand. I think I fully understood even then. There were many people in Scotland who simply didn't feel a connection or particular belonging to Britain or the UK state as a concept. I just disagreed. So I didn't. I don't want to get into individuals. I think Alex Salmond it's done incredible things for Scottish independence. Nobody could deny that. I think he's a bit of a Marmite figure, even he was then to unionists. I mean, he was not a person I found particularly, as a unionist on the other side of the debate. I found particularly, I suppose at the time I did find him quite a divisive figure. But I mean, I'm also retrofitting what I think I was thinking then in the light of what I think now. So. I think there wasn't much of a debate for me to be had at the time. But as I say, I've always respected the other side. I've not least because I know many people who are lifelong independence supporters. And one of the frustrations about constitutional politics, particularly, is that if you leave it just to the politicians, for reasons I understand, and to the political commentators, you just get an awful lot of poison flying back and forth, and most of us or many of us at least are somewhere in the middle, and we just trying to negotiate our way through a very complex set of questions, which bring in economics, democracy, and governance, which we're going to come on to, and above all that, our ties of history and culture and society, which are the hardest thing to kind of pin down, really, and as I say, probably the things that most inform many unionist vote.
How much do you think, you talked about the language there, Richard, how much do you think the language is preventing a proper discussion? Or do you feel it's only politicians who are doing this, or have we just not got the right lexicon for dealing with constitutional change, perhaps?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think, it's very, very easy. I'm not condemning people for doing this, and everybody does it to slip in. You need language to describe political creeds and concepts, and it's very easy to slip into lazy use of language and labels. But it's also a fact that it can be used as a weapon. And I think I'm coming from one side of the debate here, but I'm very, as somebody who has changed my vote, albeit still with doubts, and it's still quite a difficult journey to have made. I'm very conscious of the language that I constantly see used about people who support independence. And I use that term, which is cumbersome, because I prefer that to nationalist for obvious reasons. I mean, nationalist, as we all know, has two dictionary definitions. It can mean the kind of poisonous nationalism which tend to be implied by people using it against the independence movement, but it can also just mean a belief in self-determination, which I think is what describes most people who support independence here. Not all, but most. Separatist, very, very emotive word. I mean, that to me is true. If you look in the dictionary, it just means a desire to separate, but it's an emotive word in the way it's been used historically. And it also doesn't describe for somebody like me, it doesn't describe my starting point. My starting point is not to do harm to the UK. It's just I've come to the view, given the state of UK politics, that actually this is the better bet. If it's not that, you're cultist. You're dismissed as a cultist or painfully naive. There's a whole array of terms. Anti-English, of course. I don't feel particularly anti-English because I still feel pretty English, if I'm honest with you. So and it's not. It happens all over the place. I mean, the one that most exercised me today, as it does many, is the word, not in a Scottish context, but is the word woke, which is just used ridiculously by much of the right-wing press to describe sort of anybody with remotely progressive values. I mean, it's intellectually lazy apart from anything else. It's just to put down as an insult.
Yeah. So your journey from a no in 2014 to being supportive, in a broad sense, though you have reservations, and we can talk about those perhaps later,
yeah,
of independence, that came about largely because of your concerns with the way the UK is governed. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's true largely. I mean, it's hard to sort of say that there was a single moment or a single point. I mean, I should say, to clarify, I mean, I think my position now is I am absolutely certain I would vote for independence given the chance. That doesn't mean to say I don't have doubts about it, and I'm not even 100% sure it's the right thing to do. But weighing up the various options, and we'll come on to this, that's how I would vote. But I'd be insulting people's intelligence if I said that this was my starting point. I mean, my starting point, my preference would be to go back in time and to try to make a better union. But I simply believe we're past the point of no return on that.
Why is that, Richard? Why do you think we're past?
Well, I think so. To answer your two questions together, I think various things happened after 2016. Really, was a key, the Brexit vote, to start pushing me in this direction. I mean, I could see that the morning, I could see as soon as the vote for Brexit happened, even though it didn't convert me overnight. I mean, it was just a matter of logic to me that reopened the justification for Indy Ref 2. I mean, you cannot escape the fact that one of the principal lines of the Better Together campaign was that the best way for Scotland to stay in the EU was to stay in the UK. I mean, it's just inescapable. I mean, nobody can deny that. And people, when asked that question, just avoid a question. I mean, that's an insult to the intelligence. But I think the Brexit process, and I voted against Brexit. I think it's a disastrous mistake, but not so much for the act of leaving, but because of what it's done to our political culture and our relations with Europe. Although I think the act of leaving was wrong as well. But I mean, really, from the day after the Brexit vote, there was, where there shouldn't, and the independence movement can learn from this in the event that Scotland does become independent. There was, to my mind, a process of othering of anybody who hadn't voted to leave. So where you'd expect a kind of coming together and a degree of empathy and a degree of, it was quite a narrow result. Let's see how we can make this work together and have sort of grown up politics. I mean, what we saw was the absolute opposite. And, not only were people who voted to remain told to stay quiet, it was pretty clear from the Tory, and let's face it, it was a Conservative Party issue, that our views were not welcome on what the UK should look like and how we should do Brexit. So, for a process of years, really, it got worse and worse, but it was very clear that what people were kind of laughably portraying this as democracy in action. There was no democratic outlet for anybody at all until Brexit was delivered, which it still hasn't been really, to have any say at all on the shape of our relations with Europe. It's nonsensical. So, I felt from that point on a kind of gradual pushing away from the UK that I had grown to love and support. Not the cultural side, not the heritage side, but the politics. And this is not a comment on the SNP either way. I mean, I'm sort of neutral on the SNP. They have, like most parties, people I admire greatly, people I don't admire so much. But I don't think there's anything the SNP said at that time to pull me towards independence. I was pushed there by the Conservative Party and the Scottish Conservatives, and they know this in private. They know this has happened. Many unionists, I'm pretty confident, have moved in my direction because of the actions of the Conservative Party and the inability, the refusal of Scottish Conservatives to stand up for what Scots voted for in that referendum, which should have led, I think, to at least some kind of principled stand. They may not have got anywhere with it in favour of much softer Brexit. You know, politics. You're in politics. You need to show courage, and I think there has been a lamentable lack of courage shown by the Scottish Conservatives over the last few years, and they have themselves to blame for a lot of where we've got to now.
What do you think of the quality? And this is a loaded question, so I apologise, but several people I've interviewed recently have deplored the lack of quality in the opposition benches at Holyrood.
Yeah.
And say the reason the SNP does what it does is because there's nobody there of any great quality to posit alternatives.
Yeah. There's probably something in that, but I think there's a bigger picture here. I mean, there probably is a lack of quality in Holyrood. I mean, I find it amusing when people cite that as the reason why Scotland couldn't be independent, because you look at Westminster and you don't see it oozing with quality at the moment. I mean, that could change. Still some great quality, I might add, some very fantastic politicians, Westminster and Holyrood. I just feel there's a bigger picture at stake. I mean, everything I've just described here, you know, is changing. I'm not speaking for everybody. I mean, I could say. I mean, I think somebody's asked, do I know other people who've moved from no to yes? That's a good question. I don't know if I know anybody who's in my personal acquaintances who's definitively done that. I certainly know people who are now more open to it, and I've heard anecdotes of them who know people, you know, in similar places, you know, and who will vote for SNP at this election. I think most people hedge their bets, and sometimes I wish I'd hedged my own bets, although it wouldn't have got me on this show, because it's easier to hedge your bets, really, and it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do because it's a very difficult, complex question. I mean, we tend to see everything portrayed through the lens of economics, certainly in the unionist press, for reasons I well understand, because I think it's in the short term, it's where you might argue the strongest case, or one you know, there's quite a strong case against independence, because it would undoubtedly be a short to medium term economic hit. But I mean, it's much more than just economics. It's about governance and democracy, yeah, and the severe state we're in. And we should talk about this. And as I say, about all the socio-cultural, historical ties too, which are much harder to articulate.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about.
Yeah.
Brexit was perhaps, you know, a point where you felt that this is just not what I want at all.
Yeah.
But what has happened subsequently, which has sort of reinforced your need to change?
I didn't finish my answer before, did I? I think if there was a defining moment, it was Johnson's victory in 2019. It took a long time for me to get there. You know, I was dismayed through you know, Theresa May gets let off for a lot these days because she's been succeeded by Boris Johnson. But I mean, she has a lot of responsibility for where we got to. But you know, she was essentially, I think, somebody who believed in telling the truth and struggled to do that in the context of Brexit because of the trade-offs involved. And you could see the pain and anguish on her face having to deal with it. Johnson, as we know, lies effortlessly and has no problem doing it at all. And I felt that the victory, Johnson's victory in 2019, and the scale of that victory, it made me feel something had changed immeasurably. No, it was an unusual election because I don't think he wasn't there's the choice between Johnson and Corbyn, who many people felt similarly strongly about for different reasons. But I do think that was the moment for me when things felt quite clear. And by that I mean it's still a question I accept I could be wrong on, but I think we need to take a step back, and we've got so used over the last 5 years to the scale of the decline and the nature of the government we have that you sometimes have to step back and look at the bigger picture. And it's not a time for mincing words. You know, we have a prime minister who is a pathological liar, who is effectively all powerful at the moment, can do anything he wants. He's a security risk. I mean, if he were a civil servant, he'd get nowhere near security clearance when he won't tell us who's paying him. We need to be blunt about these things. Our liberal sensitivities tend to make us sort of measure our words, and quite rightly usually. But there are times when I think you shouldn't measure your words. So that's one thing. We have a government which treats any form of scrutiny or attempt to hold it to account as a hostile attack, and is one by one attacking all the institutions that have the job of doing that: Parliament, civil service, the judiciary, the media. We have a government which is unquestionably undermining the devolved settlements and will continue to do that in Scotland and Wales. We have a government which is mired in corruption and which is fairly brazenly making it clear to voters in Hartlepool at the moment and elsewhere that voting for it will do them lots of favours in terms of getting public money, and by implication, areas that don't vote Tory will lose out. And then bigger still, I mean, we have in all too recent memory, I'm not going to get into Northern Irish politics, but we have civil conflict in the UK in all too recent memory. We have a government which, for ideological reasons, has destabilised a very fragile peace settlement and spent the last 2 years lying about its own role in it. I mean, I know some people will say that's not true. I think it's fairly unquestionable, actually. But almost biggest for me of all, I mean, given my background, is we, and when I say we, I mean the UK 5 years ago, were in a position of great geopolitical strength, punching above our weight, as people often said. I mean, influential globally, highly influential within Europe, and we're missed now by many of our European allies, the ones who depended on the UK's sort of wisdom, if you like, and point of view. In 5 short years, we've gone from that position to a position where we've made adversaries of the entire European continent, which is against the kind of strategy of Britain since Britain started to exist, not to unite the continent against us. We've trashed our international reputation. We've twice now threatened to break international law. At best, we've become an international laughingstock. At worst, you could describe this as a nascent rogue state behaviour. This is serious stuff, and to add to that, I mean, it's no secret there are many within government or who've been within government who've stated on the record in the past that they'd like to see the EU collapse. And these are the people who have the gall to tell us, whatever you think of the EU, and I understand many of the criticisms, it is essentially a peace project. These people have the gall to tell us what our fathers and our ancestors fought for in a war, while trying to dismantle a peace project on our doorstep. So you could tell I feel strongly about this stuff, but it's important. It matters, this stuff, for our democracy. And if you're persuaded that this is just democracy because we get a vote every 5 years, I'm afraid you're wrong. It isn't democracy. If you don't behave democratically, the fact you've been democratically elected doesn't make you a Democrat. So I think people. None of this is to say there are not huge and essential questions that the independence movement have to answer. But I think what I'm trying to get across to unionists is that there is a huge risk to staying in the UK too at the moment. My starting point in all this, it's a bit of a cliche, is I have young children, as I've just told you. In 10 years' time, my eldest will be reaching adulthood. I want her to grow up in a liberal democracy. I mean, there is an argument that liberal democracy is a threat globally at the moment. I mean, Joe Biden was making this point last week. But at the moment, I think, given the state of the UK and where it's heading, and given where I think Scotland would try to get to with independence, including either through joining the EU or close association, I think independence provides a more secure chance of that. Not only a liberal democracy, but one which has grown-up relations with its European neighbours, I might add, which I think is very important. I mean, I've often reflected that it has been British government practice since the war to stay close to Europe and to be on good terms with our European allies. So, which government is now truer to that traditional British strategy? The British government or the Scottish government? Unanswerable.
There's an argument. Thank you for that. There is an argument that says, well, Richard, can see you're upset, but and understand your reasons very well. But wouldn't it be best just to sit tight and hope for a Labour government, and everything, all of these concerns that you've just identified will just disappear, surely?
It's a very valid argument, and it's the argument that I would say most of my, or many of my friends and family would espouse. And the truth is, we don't know the answer to that. You're dealing with uncertainties, and you have to assess risk. I think it's very important that Scottish voters look at English politics as well as Scottish politics. It's every bit as important, actually, because I mean, you might very reasonably say that it's not healthy for any party to be in power for as long as the SNP has here, and I'd agree with that. That's not a criticism of them as such. It's just the nature of democracy. It's not healthy. Well, I mean, the first thing people say is, well, it's just Boris Johnson, and Boris Johnson's here, he'll be gone tomorrow, and democracies move on. I don't really buy that. I mean, this whole fiasco has been caused by Conservative Party infighting. Most Conservative moderates have long since been kicked out of the party. If Johnson goes tomorrow, and he'll only go when Tory MPs decide he's a risk to their electoral chances, which I don't think he is. Or will be. I think they'll hang on to him. He's not. There isn't somebody pleasant and benign waiting to take his place. So we are stuck with what this party has become for the moment. I mean, I never say never. I sincerely hope that will change, but it's not going to change quickly. And I must add, this is not an anti-conservative. I'm not a conservative, but I mean, there are plenty of conservatives I greatly admire. Most of them are no longer in the party, but it's a pro-democracy point. These people have been taken over. This party's been taken over by people who are not democratic. The Labour point's important, but I think is almost even more important than the point I made about the Conservatives. The electoral system is not able to cope with where we are right now. I have a great deal of sympathy for the Labour Party. And for Keir Starmer, he's not particularly impressing me, but I think he's got an almost impossible job. He has to appeal to different constituencies. He has to somehow win back the Red Wall voters in Northern England, and it looks like he's going to fail on the first step of that in Hartlepool tomorrow. It seems to me highly unlikely, given the state of the culture wars at the moment and the way the Conservatives are very skillfully deploying them, that Labour are going to win either on their own or through a so-called progressive alliance in 3 years' time, which means, if I'm right, you're looking at least 8 more years of Conservative government, and we'll come back to what that might mean. But even if Labour were to win, can I see them delivering the electoral form needed to prevent zealots ever taking over the UK again? Possibly. I mean, tricky, but I think possibly. The constitutional reform needed, I think, to get the union into better shape. Highly unlikely. You and I have discussed this separately, but what's in that for the English? I mean, I have some sympathy for that with my English apple for that perspective. If Starmer became PM and tried to at least take us close to the EU, if not joining, as I'm sure he would, can you imagine the hostility of the coverage he'd be getting in the English press, particularly? His job would be impossible. We are in the grip of this hard right. I'm not going to use the word conspiracy because I don't believe in those, but media, political parties. I just don't see Labour getting into power and having the leverage to do the kinds of things that would give me the hope that I'm looking for. So I think we're in. I may be wrong. I think I'm not wrong, but I may be wrong, and this is the key question. If they don't get into power, we are in a spiral. I think it's going to get worse. I think we will end up like Erdogan's Turkey or Orban's Hungary. I don't want my children to grow up in that country, and it pains me hugely to countenance the breakup of the UK. And I think this is something people in the independence movement who don't understand that do need to understand, that there may be many people who will vote for independence one day if they get the chance, who will do so with great sorrow. Now, I'm conscious this all sounds very negative. That's not to say there isn't a positive case for independence. And I can see it, and I believe in it. I think my point is many people wouldn't get to the point where they're even considering it without what's happened in the last few years.
I mean, some people have argued that Britain can only be, this is going to sound odd, Britain can only be restored if Scotland becomes independent. Because there needs to be a shock to the system, i.e., what you're reaching for, some might say, is major constitutional reform. And history tells us that that's very unlikely unless there's a shock to the system. People don't naturally gravitate to saying one morning, hey, let's abolish the House of Lords. Let's get rid of first past the post. I mean, these are generally the outcome of something fairly traumatic happening that shocks the body politic into understanding that things cannot carry on the way they have been doing.
Yep. I hear those. I mean, I've heard the argument put that England needs the dissolution of the union as much as Scotland and others do. I'm not sure. I mean, there may be something in that. I haven't seen the argument fully work through. It doesn't necessarily resonate with me. I do think it's common wisdom, if you like, to say that England needs a shock, and England needs sort of I mean, it clearly does need electoral reform. I find that hard to argue with, because and one of the tragedies I think about England is that the Brexit vote and the nature of the Conservative Party, which is to shapeshift and to sort of pull in people from all over, means that there's a minority, a considerable minority, I might add, have led us to this point. But I don't know. I don't feel I don't feel the authority to speak in detail about English politics, because I think it'd be patronising to do that, and I don't live in England anymore. And and even when I did, there are parts of England I don't know that well.
Isn't that perhaps the root of the issue in some respects?
Yeah,
it is that the UK is perhaps over-centralised.
Yeah,
and because devolution took the form that it did, i.e. in a very sort of rather unbalanced way, where people in England, they were just told this is going to happen. There were votes in Wales and in Scotland, but nobody in England voted. Nobody thought it was even necessary to ask them. And any attempts to devolve power in England have been lackluster, perhaps. And that, so what has happened is the centralised state has remained very centralised, perhaps, but with this odd acknowledgement that other bits might not want that centralisation to that degree. So they will have this little bit of decentralisation, but we must keep the rest of it close to hand, as it were. And I think that's very disabling if you live in, say, Northern England, for example. Now, maybe the Hartlepool result will confound all of this and say, well, people don't care too much. I would have thought people do care. I would have thought people who lived in Yorkshire do care that Yorkshire has a voice for Yorkshire. I mean, it would seem to be odd if they didn't.
I'd be amazed if they didn't too, and I can't speak for Yorkshire, but I agree. I think there's it's dangerous ground. It's very easy to get into a place where you, which I don't want to do, where you patronise voters in England who voted a certain way and voted in a way that I don't think is in the interest of the UK. I well understand, I think, much of the anger that may have driven the Brexit vote. I can't pretend to fully understand the motivations, but I don't like to sort of make assumptions about how people in England en masse feel. I mean, England is a very divided place politically, like Scotland, I think. I mean, it's not divided on the independence question, but it's certainly divided on on the Brexit and sort of associated issues question. And I don't know how that resolves itself. I'm not fully convinced by the argument that Scottish independence would sort of help England solve its own governance problems. It might do. And I think this comes back to one of the questions why this is quite a painful issue, because we all have multiple identities. We all have split loyalties almost. I mean, I think if I was still living in England with the same set of values, the same background, I would probably be very sad and opposed to the idea of Scottish independence, because I would feel the loss of something, which indeed I do when I think about it here. But I think much of that's already lost. That's my sadness. So I think I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this, but I think I do have that English side of me that sort of feels sad about the loss of the union.
Yeah. So if we were to end up with a Scandinavian model,
yeah,
for this archipelago, how would you feel about that? For example, the Scandinavians cooperate all the time, but the Danes have their own sovereignty, as do the Norwegians, as do the Swedes. They sometimes disagree, perhaps not very often, but they do from time to time. People still see themselves as Danish, but somehow they're equally comfortable with Scandinavia. They have an airline which is called SAS. It's like, there are sovereign groups within that umbrella entity. How would you feel about that as a model?
Well, I mean, it would delight me in the event of independence if that's. I mean, not only would I like it, but I think that's where we would have to end up. I think I have no question, in fact, that one of it maybe there are people who can see a case for independence with their head, but their heart just prevents them going the extra mile because of that worry about severing ties with the UK, with the rump UK, with England. And not only that, with that being exploited by politicians. I mean, let's face it, there is some anti-Englishness up here. That is, I haven't experienced it myself at all, but it'd be naive to say it doesn't exist at all. I don't think it's huge numbers. There's certainly anti-Scottishness in England. I mean, you don't have to look far on social media. I mean, social media is a bad place to look for anything, but
that's for sure.
That worry that malign forces on both sides will kind of rub salt into the wound rather than build bridges that keep us close. And and I have to say, one of the actors that worries me, and that is the current UK government. I mean, I don't think they're not a government that believes in reaching out and making friends with people who don't share their views. They're a government who sees anything other than their worldview as an act of hostility. So it's a bit of a paradox in a way. The impetus to leave feels all the greater when we have a government such as the current one that we have under the Conservatives. Equally, they're likely to make it more difficult for that departure to happen, I think. But to come back to your point, I think some kind of Scandinavian model would be entirely desirable. I mean, you have to assume there'd be a common travel area with the UK as there was with Ireland, and that could be built, lead to something else too. There's no question that if it were Scotland to join the EU or even the EU EFTA, there would have to be a border, and if people start pretending that's not the case, then they're misleading us. I think that would be a great shame. I would feel it personally, but we let's be clear of this. If that were to happen, it's because the Brexiteers believe in building borders. I mean, it's not the starting point for the independence movement to create a hard border with England. It's a result of hard Brexit. Now, you might argue that that's true, but we can't. It's still too much to contemplate. I would argue that if your position is that because of hard Brexit, we can't detach ourselves, I would argue the opposite. I mean, I think I feel the need to get away from the culture which is currently dominating English governance.
Yeah. So, if, for example, you had you felt independence was going to happen, what sort of, because you would have a blank, let's assume you're a blank sheet of paper and you were running Scotland after independence, what sort of country would you create? What sort of state would you feel would be appropriate?
Well, I think the starting point would be an electoral system which is already better than that of Westminster, but probably could do with further refinement. I'm naturally drawn towards PR, while understanding that the purest forms of PR bring other drawbacks. But I'm fed up with. I'm a classic tactical voter. I've always voted tactically because I think you have to vote with the system that's delivered to you. But I would love to live in a country where I could vote always for the party I want to vote for, on the basis of their policies, rather than to prevent the parties I don't want getting into power. So I think a watertight political system, which I hope would lead to a healthier multi-party democracy than we have in the UK. You'd have to aspire to a system which didn't allow for the dominance of two great parties to the exclusion of all else, which PR would do. I happen to think certainly the Conservative Party in a newly independent Scotland will be a very strong player and would probably, at some point in the future, form a government. I wouldn't vote for it myself, but I think that would be, it would be healthy to have a strong Conservative Party, and I think it'd be helpful for the Conservative Party to be free of the shackles of the UK party. I would want to live in a country which, I'm a strong believer in the EU, not uncritically, but because I think it's for the greater good. I would certainly aspire to EU membership. I feel the loss of freedom of movement again when I think of my children. With tremendous anger, actually. I mean, it's a tremendous sense of loss, but I mean, they've had that taken away from them. For many, many people, that has had very real life and devastating effects already. And I'm not going to compare the loss of my children's theoretical rights to the damage that has already done to people's lives as we speak. But it is a huge loss, and I think something really precious has been broken. So I would certainly aspire to getting back into that. But I would want a Scotland which, as you said, John, had extremely strong links with the UK, whatever the nature of the UK government, but hopefully in the future there'll be a more benign one, and that did its best to maintain those very strong cultural links, which I suspect even people who are lifelong independence supporters feel on one level or another. I don't know, but I can't speak for them, but I suspect they do.
What would you say if somebody offered you the job of setting up a DFID in an independent Scotland?
I would say no, because generally I'm not a development expert. I think I'd probably look for somebody better, but I would love to be part of that. I'd love to be part of I said that as somebody who's given up office work and it doesn't miss it at all. But I think if Scotland were to become independent before I reached retirement age, which isn't that far off, I would love to be part of helping to build that, and I'd be very interested in part of whatever it took to maintain those links with England and the rest of the UK.
What about running for office?
I don't think so. Other people have said that to me. I think, as I just said to you earlier, I was, when you're a civil servant, you get used to never being able to say what you want, and you just accept it as a way of life, in public. I'm hugely enjoying being able to say what I want at the moment. And to some extent, that's the case, obviously, when you're a political party too. I mean, for reasons I well understand. So I think this debate needs more non-political voices, shouting quite loudly on both sides of the debate, I might add. It frustrates me that you can have these conversations with friends and family. You can disagree with each other very strongly sometimes, but you don't bear any resentment towards each other. You treat each other as the adults, and you love each other just as much at the end of it. And yet, put it into the media and the political forum, and it's bile. And I'm not blaming one party or another for this. I mean, it's just what the political system and the need to win seats does. But it's particularly unpleasant and poisonous at the moment. And the more we can have a sort of civil society debate, which of course exists already, I know it does, but debate, grown-up debate about it, the better.
I mean, I think most people would agree with you, frankly. And a lot of people feel, and I would like to get your view on this, please, that the dumbing down, if I could call it that, of politics, some of it borrowed from the States, but sometimes borrowed very willingly, has been aided by the mainstream media. They could have staunched this. They could have said, no, you can't come on and lie, because our duty of impartiality, they might argue, is we're going to allow somebody else to follow you, will also lie. And therefore we're completely impartial. Whereas you could argue, well, no, that's not impartiality. You do a disservice to everybody if you allow people to appear in the media and the public prints and just plain lie without remorse. So, what's your view on that? Do you think the media has played a role in dumbing down?
I think it has. I don't like attacking journalists because I think they have very, very difficult job at the moment. And I'm sure they're mostly doing their best. I mean, there are different kinds of journalists, let's face it. I'm also very, very critical of individual journalists. I think they get it wrong. But I think the pressures, we probably underestimate the pressures they're under, both from their own management, from the two sides, of any debate going on with them. Having said all that, I think some of the editorial decisions that are taken, climate change is a classic one, isn't it? To always have a climate change denier on to counterbalance the argument that there is such a thing as climate change is wrong. And I can't think of any examples off the hand right now. But I think the media has helped facilitate to a degree a culture of being able to get away with barefaced lying. I mean, lying is a difficult word for any journalist to use because you can't always prove intent, can you? I mean, you can say misleading, but once something is known to be verifiably inaccurate and then not corrected, then you have to conclude it's a deliberate lie, and you can do that with Boris Johnson on a daily basis. But it's very easy to knock the BBC, which is often the subtext of this, and I think there's a huge amount to criticise them for. But I think they have an incredibly difficult job, the journalists at the BBC. Look what's happening to the BBC board at the moment. The Tory donors, Tory party members joining the board. It's often said, by overdoing the attacks on the BBC, however warranted they are, you risk destroying the whole thing. And I do still think that destroying the BBC and its news service would be a tragic loss. And it's an example of something actually I would like to see. You going back to your point about the maintaining links in an independent Scotland, you hope some kind of link on that basis will be maintained.
Yeah, I'm interested in what you say, because it's hard to believe that the BBC can continue to be impartial if its entire governance arrangement has been set in place by the government.
I agree. I mean, I think you're probably seeing something quite extreme at the moment because we have an extreme government in place. But I mean, I think it's always been the case, I think, that BBC coverage will tend to be biased towards the government of the day. And I think, if we're honest, that happened under the Labour government too. Obviously, I'm talking about the UK government here. And I suppose it's just something which tends to happen, by virtue of the way the BBC gets its funding, and it's not healthy. That said, I think there's so much that's good about the BBC too. It'd be a shame to lose it, but it underlines the importance of having other alternatives to the BBC. And then we're talking about broadcast media, print media. I don't read it all. Where do you begin? I mean, there is a lot of utter poison printed in the print media. I think it's a real issue in this country. I don't begin to know how to tackle it, but I mean, it's a dominance of that section of media which worries me almost as much as the nature of the government and the influence they have on the government.
I suppose one rather comforting thought is that young people less and less use the mainstream media. They have their own, the social media. They have all sorts of other ways of finding out what is happening and what's important to them. And of course, in Scotland, people can vote from 16 onwards. I hear tell that's going to be extended in England. I think it's also the case in Wales, perhaps. How do you feel about that, about 16-year-olds voting? Are you for it or against it?
I think I'm for it. It's funny. It's not something I've thought about a great deal. I don't. I know you have to have a view on everything if you appear on the radio. So apologies. But my instincts tell me it's a good thing. I think if you're old enough to do some things at the age of 16, you should be old enough to vote. I would have thought, and it should encourage. I mean, people who say that you're 16, you're not old enough to vote. I think the problem with that argument is, it's not just about age, isn't it? It's about you can get in a very dangerous road when you're talking about democracy and who should be allowed to vote and who shouldn't be allowed to vote. So I think if you're defined as an adult at a certain age, in some respect, that should extend to the voting age. I haven't given it a great deal of thought, I'll be honest with you, but my instincts are that feels right to me.
Well, perhaps once your daughter gets a few years older, you'll start to think.
Yeah.
I'm always reminded of that lovely quote by Mark Twain, who said that when he was 15, he thought his father was the most ignorant man he'd ever met. And by the time he was 21, he was astonished how much his father had learned in 6 short years.
Right.
We're almost at the end of our time, and we've got about 4 or 5 minutes to go, Richard. Is there any particular message that you would like to give to people watching and listening tonight that perhaps we haven't covered?
Yeah, I mean, good question. It's hard to say this stuff without sounding cheesy, isn't it? But I think it's just that repeating that point about trying to understand each other. You know, there's great anger around the moment, and that's understandable. People have real passions, you know, and of course there'll be people who would listen to what I just said to you and think I'm talking delusional rubbish, you know. On the Conservative side, I do think there's something out of the ordinary about the nature of the current Conservative Party, and I suspect many Conservatives in Scotland and England agree with me, you know. And I think so. I think there's a message in there about this isn't just a normal politics. We're in dangerous times, you know, and we need to fight for our democratic rights because it's precious and we can lose it. But then I think the bigger message too is that we just need to try to understand each other, and you know, without letting tempers fray us. It's difficult. It's not always easy. Social media makes it very difficult. You know, we all fall into bad habits. I've done it myself. We just have to try to be better than that and try to understand each other, try to be patient with each other's views. And I guess always try to imagine if you're having an argument on social media that actually you're talking to a friend face to face, and you know, and then accommodate your behavior accordingly. But you know, I wrote a piece in the Times about this last year, and I sort of deliberately, provocatively ended off by saying, "Am I being naive?" And I got lots of people on social media saying, "You're being naive." And then we had, you know, nice friendly chats with each other. But it's I probably am being a bit naive, but you know, there's no harm in reaching high, is there?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, if you don't mind me saying so, you have a certain diffidence that comes from the civil service of expressing yourself in a way that would not be offensive to anyone. You know, and you're very guarded in your comments sometimes, but I can feel the passion underneath. And maybe in your new role, you'll get a chance to talk more and more about what's important to you. I think that's very important. I think when you have a voice, it's good to use it, I would say.
Well, I started writing a year ago. I'm not a journalist. I started writing really out of frustration. I just wanted to get things off my chest. And I think I've developed what you might call a kind of style of controlled anger. I'm not really normally a very angry person, and I'm not a particularly political person, actually. I've been political, and I'm not particularly political in terms of policy issues. You know, I just have been politicized, as have many, by the events of the last few years. And what I really believe in is democracy, you know, and that's a very broad term, but functioning democracy rather than pretend democracy.
Yeah, and I suspect what we're about to enter, regardless of the results of the elections tomorrow, is an environment where the whole sort of unionist independence lexicon will be placed to one side, and it'll be a Democrat versus anti-democracy discussion increasingly. And maybe for people outside Scotland, Scotland will be the place where that debate will be engaged, perhaps, which might not be a terribly bad thing, frankly, thinking about it. Well, our time is almost up, Richard. Let me thank you very much indeed. We've had a bunch of questions, but most of them you already anticipated. You answered them before they arrived. And Ruth Hanratty said, your children won't benefit from Erasmus, which infuriates me.
I couldn't agree.
That point earlier.
Me too, Ruth, yeah. Maybe they will, maybe they still will, we'll see.
Okay.
But no, you're right, it does infuriate me, it's disgusting. But we're going to have to end there, aren't we?
So I encourage you to keep speaking out if you want. If by the way, folks, if you want to follow Richard's views, he writes regularly for the Times. He's got a piece coming out sometime soon, maybe in the next couple of 3 days. Please look out for it. What's it headlined again, please, Richard? Do you remember?
The piece well, I should say, I mean, I haven't been promised. I've just been told it probably will be published. I don't have I'm not a formal employee. I don't know what the title will be if it is published, but it's really the point I've been talking about. That the question people need to think about democracy and the threat to it in considering the independence question, not just the economics. It's more than just that.
Okay, that's super. That's it. So there you are, folks. You get a chance to look at perhaps a summary of some of the points that we'll be covering tonight, and I would encourage you to do so. I would also please encourage you to look out for Dr. Elliot Bulmer's column in the Constitution column in the Sunday National in the 7-day supplement this week, because he'll be talking about some of the things that Richard has been addressing tonight so eloquently. And I think he's going to call it How Independence Might Save Britain. Now, there's a controversial headline. So you'll find that in the 7 days section. We've got a very special guest next week. I can't tell you much more about it, except that it will be a woman, and we're looking forward to her views on perhaps the result of the elections, how women feel about the way that Scotland is governed, and for that matter, the UK more generally. And please support India Live. You'll see the What's On guide at the bottom. Let me just remind you that it's www.whatsonguide.scot. You can go there, find about all the programs, including this one, and find out about the guests who are lined up for the weeks ahead. So please consult that. It's very, very helpful. And thanks again. Big thank you to Richard. And thank you to you for joining us tonight. And remember, it's been a great day for British democracy. Good night, all. Take care.